LDComics is a women-led, welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachael Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
So this is me, and let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm an animator mostly because I studied animation in the Netherlands. And animation is about animated films, so 2D, 3D, commercials, visuals, that kind of stuff. But I was always very, very intrigued by comic books. I was always reading comics and drawing them on the side, and basically as a hobby, I was doing comics. And one other thing I was doing was illustration. So I was always doing like 3 tons of jobs through my life, and I've got some examples of that. First, the illustration. So these are things I did for newspapers, for example, for websites, for games. On the left side, you can see an illustration I did for a children's book. On the right side, on top, you see an illustration I did for a former concentration camp in the Netherlands, which is now a museum. Right side down corner is concept art for a game. So you can already see that I have a style that is very versatile. I can do a lot of different things, and I usually adapt to what is asked from me, or the type of work that is needed. So these are the kinds of animations that I did. Of course, this is not moving, but these are stills from the animations, and these were all very commercial things, like music videos or clips for TV shows or films for theater. And as you can see, it's all 2D because I really love drawing. And I always loved, spending a lot of time on the backgrounds. I like to paint, digitally in Photoshop and make those backgrounds look like they were really painted. And sometimes that even came through in the animation itself. So again, a lot of different work, and a lot of people tell me that if they look at my portfolio, they just think it's done by 100 different people. That's not true, just me. And like I said, I was always doing comics. I was always interested in the comic format, the book form, and all that. But I was always a bit shy in publishing real books, in publishing small press books. I mean, I did do it, but it was mostly like comics, humoristic comics, because that kind of felt like a safe space. Like if I could make people laugh, you can instantly feel the effect of a good humorous comic. People just laugh out loud, and so that was what I was doing. I was making a lot of funny comics. And I even got a job in a newspaper as a daily cartoonist when I was about 20 years old. And that lasted for about 5 years. So every day for 5 years, I was doing these funny comics for a newspaper. But I have to say that after a while, I was a bit tired of being funny. So I thought, I want to dive deeper into what comics are, and I want to dive deeper into how you can draw a graphic novel, how you can draw a comic story that's engaging and goes deeper than superficial funny comics. And the first thing I did was I called up an old friend and editor of mine, Mara, in Amsterdam, and she worked for this publisher that was mainly a literary publisher, but they also did some graphic novels. And I just asked her if she could help me in making and publishing a graphic novel. And she took a huge risk because I never done anything like that. I only did funny comics, like I said, and animation and illustration. And this journey of graphic novels was really just starting. And she trusted me entirely with all her time and efforts and talents. And together we made this book, The Return of the Honey Buzzard, which came out with SelfMadeHero in London. And this book was my debut, my first graphic novel, and it was so amazing to do. Because as you can see, I was really, I was drawing better than ever. I could lose myself in details and, you know, really focus on the drawings for once, and that was great. So this book came out in the Netherlands and in the UK and in France, and it was actually a big success. And so afterwards, a lot of publishers just contacted me with requests for more graphic novels. And slowly, I started drifting towards being a full-time graphic novelist. And the next thing that happened was this book. And this was like 2 years later, I think this came out in 2017 or 18. And this was a collaboration with a French writer, Zidrou, who was very famous actually in France and Belgium because he did a million comic books. So even when I grew up, I was reading his work. So he's been in the field for a long time. And he's been writing amazing stories about life, about death, about, you know, love stories, adoption stories. He's really doing such a great job. And when he contacted me for a comic book, I immediately said yes, because he was one of my heroes. And this book is so beautiful because it's about the love between two people of age. They're both 60 plus, and they discover love the way teenagers do. They fall in love, they have sex for the first time, they have all these little beautiful romantic moments together. But at the same time, they're of age. So they have a whole life behind them. They have children, they have other families, they've gone through a lot of emotions in their lives, and they've lost a lot of people. And so this is all, you know, returning in their relationship. So it's really a beautiful book, and a taboo breaking book, I would say, which again was a big success. And I was so happy, you know, to see that this subject was picked up so well by the press and by the readers. What happened next was that I just wanted to make a graphic novel without a publisher. And I don't think I have enough time to explain why, but mostly it was because the other two books were so much work, and there was always this publisher that was looking over your shoulder and kind of telling you, oh, this is good, or this could be better, or, you know, and I have to say they were always right, you know, but it's always nice to do like the indie comic where you are in full control and you don't have to listen to anyone. And I'm also a very stubborn person, so I just wanted to make a comic in my spare time, in the weekends, in the evenings, and have nobody tell me what to do. So I created Taxi, which is an autobiography about the trips that I made during the years, visiting comic book festivals and exhibitions of my work everywhere in the world. And each time, of course, I had to take a taxi. I had to take a taxi from the airport to the hotel, or from the hotel to the venue, or, you know, so many taxis. So this is basically a collection of taxi stories. And it's not made up. It's completely based on my own diaries. And I've edited some photos here of that diary. You can see that I don't really write in my diary. I just draw. I draw like a comic book. So my diaries are basically just thumbnails of potential comics, I guess. And I always write in English because, you know, the conversations usually are also in English when I arrive in a country that's not Holland. So yeah, so you can see that, you know, if these thumbnails are just like this, created digitally, they already kind of look like a comic book. So these are basically the digital copies of those diary pages. And the next phase is to, to make good sketches of these, and then the good ink drawings. And this is what happens. So here on the left, you can see one of the thumbnails that I did digitally in Photoshop, and on the right, you see the final work. So yeah, this is the process of Taxi. And I have to say, it's one of my favorite books so far, because it's so personal, and it's a lot about my personal life, my personal thoughts about taxi drivers and traveling and humanity in general. So if you're not familiar with my work and you have to choose one book, perhaps I would say buy Taxi. And then on to the final book, which is going to hit the stores this week in the UK and the US and Canada. And I have to start in 2016, I think, when I saw this picture, which is a photograph of a dust storm in 1934, a dust storm on the Great Plains of the United States. And I was just completely struck by this image. I don't even know where I saw this. It was probably some website, historical website with black and white pictures, But it just looked like a huge wave or something, a wave of dust and sand going over this little town. And I could just imagine myself being in one of those houses and being completely scared of, what's coming next. And it kind of looks like a disaster movie, but it really happened. And this was called the Dust Bowl, which was a region in the United States where they had these kind of huge dust storms all the time. And here's some more pictures of that. It's, for me as a European, I did not know anything about this period and about this thing called the Dust Bowl, probably because in our history books, there's more focus on, Second World War and everything leading up to that in the 1930s. So I completely missed everything about the Dust Bowl, but when I discovered these images, I just knew that I had to make a graphic novel about this thing. Also because all these pictures are black and white, and I thought, I want to add color to these because these storms must have had a color. So I've been digging, I've been reading, I had some diaries from people from the Dust Bowl, and suddenly there were these beautiful descriptions of the colors of these clouds. And basically they were orange, yellow, reddish, they had all these very vibrant colors. And I thought, wow, this is a graphic novel that has to happen. If it's not me, it has to be someone else. But, it's such a shame that the only images we have of the Dust Bowl are black and white. So this was one of the first pictures I draw, and it also ended up in the book. On the left, you see the main character, John, who is a photographer. And on the right, you see Betty, who lives in the Dust Bowl. And so John comes into the Dust Bowl as a photographer. He comes in from New York, and he's basically discovering the Dust Bowl along with the readers. And Betty is taking him by the hand to show him everything that's going on in the Dust Bowl. And what I really love about this book is, I think, mostly the drawings, because I can see myself that I made a huge progress in drawing. Even if you look at these cars, cars are always so difficult to draw. I mean, if there's more artists in this chat, they know that cars are impossible to draw. But I think it's because the book Taxi, which featured many cars, somehow during the years I got better at it, and now I just love drawing cars. And just looking at this picture, I'm even amazed by how I did this. Like 10 years ago, I would never imagine me drawing a scene like this. I would just choose not to do it. And then one other thing that I really love and that I've heard in reactions from France and the Netherlands, where the book came out a year ago, one of the reactions I hear is that they really feel as if they are there. So they really feel immersed in the Dust Bowl and in this barren landscape that is dry, where sand is everywhere, where dust is everywhere. And I think that's the best compliment you can get as an artist, that people feel that they are there. And for me, it was the same thing for 5 years, which is as long as I've been working on this book. For 5 years, I felt like I was living in the Dust Bowl. And these are the colors I was talking about, the orange and the yellow and the red. And this is a picture from the book that has about 200 layers in Photoshop, and actually it crashed my computer. So I figured out that Photoshop can only have up to 2 gigabyte of of drawing material in one file. So this was bigger than 2 gigabyte, and it crashed my computer and Photoshop. And in the end, it worked out. But whenever I see this image, I just get completely stressed out of that feeling, sweaty feeling of, oh shit. Anyway. This is the cover of the book, so it's out this week by SelfMadeHero. So I hope if you're interested in this book and in the history, that you all buy it or read it somehow. I'm just very proud of it. I'm very happy that it's hitting the stores this week. So I think that's it for me. I have no idea how much time I got left, but I just want to say thanks so much for having me, and I'm always happy to share my work. And if there are any questions, in the chat, I'm around, and just shoot.
So my name is Sheila Putri. I live in Jakarta, Indonesia, and I have a stage name. It's not a real stage name. It's my social media account's name. It's Sheila's Playground. It's easily discovered on Instagram or Facebook. And I'm a comic artist and cartoonist. And my main inspiration is mostly about daily life, about my personal experience, about family, my cats, my friends, and how I cannot work without chocolate. I mean, it's all about my main. It's just how I live my life. It's the most. It's the main inspiration for my work. And in 2019, I published a book. It's called La Family. It's about about my how do you say, my experience as a mother of 2 young children and a lot of fur babies too. I have lots of cats at home, and the story is just revolved around how busy I was taking care of my kids, or about how I wanted to be motivated, but apparently motivation is very hard, something like that. I mean, it's just something relatable to a lot of mothers, I assume, and also about how I take care of my cats, and how and this is about when my cat was sick and I tried to put a pill inside his mouth, and the result was not good because I had to force it. I mean, and it was nice to be made into a comic strip like this. And yeah, aside from my daily life, also about traveling, my work's also about traveling, and this is one of my work. It's this project was sponsored by the Ministry of Culture in Indonesia to celebrate the sister city relationship between Jakarta and Berlin. So, but the topic was about urban farming in big cities. And yeah, it was nice because I was invited to go to Berlin and actually found the inspiration from the process of traveling itself. So it's mostly so I did the comic after I traveled to Berlin. So it's a reportage. And then so this is mostly my approach in comics. It's I draw a cartoony face about me, and I draw a lot of cartoon personification of the cities I travel to, of the landmarks. So this is how I travel from Jakarta 10,000 kilometers to Berlin. And then, because I also love to draw about my city, Jakarta, and in 2017, Art Review magazine asked me to draw a city, no, to draw my city, but they only gave me 2 pages. I mean, at that moment, it was it was difficult to put a lot of stories about Jakarta in 2 pages. So I picked a story about mobility, about how we are lucky to have a motorcycle taxi. We call it ojek. So ojek helps me survive Jakarta traffic. Yeah, they really help us Jakartans to go out and about in our life. And because I like to make stories about Jakarta in particular, in 2019, Jakarta finally has its own subway. Yay, we have a subway. I mean, we have trains, but that was the first time we had underground trains. Yeah, it was a breakthrough for Jakarta, and the MRT company asked me to draw. It's like a guidebook. It's like an educational comic about what is MRT and the do's and the don'ts of MRT, because it's a new thing. It's very new for the Jakarta, so it's good for them to be educated, but by visual. So mostly the theme is about what's the problem with transportation in Jakarta, the traffic jam, and why we need MRT, something like that. Yeah, MRT means mass rapid transportation. Yeah, it's MRT, it's subway. Yeah, and I also love to draw about culture, and this is a festival and from Central Java. This called Sekaten. It's a celebration of the Islamic prophet Muhammad's birthday, and it's native only in Yogyakarta. So I think it's very interesting to draw. And yeah, and I want to talk about COVID related works because, and out of my surprise, I mean, it was a surprise that I still got a lot of projects during COVID, because COVID was a very striving time for us artists, but apparently a lot of companies need us to socialize their works. Let's say I was hired to draw an illustrated handbook about COVID-19. I mean, because it was really the beginning of the pandemic. They want me to draw, about what is COVID and what to do and how do you live during this pandemic. We have to have a distance between us. It's social distancing. We have to wear masks, and this all distributed in clinics in provinces, because visual conveys message stronger, because there are still maybe some kids who cannot read, or maybe some older people who is already have difficulty in reading. So visual really helps. And this is just the example. And because I work a lot with companies, for example, I have a, a recurring client. It's from the state bank. It's called Bank Nasional Indonesia. And they asked me to draw comic strip, but only distributed internally. So instead of sending conventional emails with only text, they send comic strip to the employees. And this is one of them was about how to commute during COVID, something like that. And they even asked us to draw shuttle bus information. I mean, because back then, in the beginning of COVID, a lot of public transport are closed, are not in function, so they had to travel by car. And so they arranged like a, a shared car. So they instead of giving this information only by text, they asked me to draw it. Yeah, this is the kind of works I do with my recurring client from the bank. I also do a lot of educational comic. This one is about what is stunting, because in some places in Indonesia, there are still children who suffer malnutrition, and this is an education for their parents. This one was a project from the Ministry of Health, and this is one of my favorite project. It's a graphic novel about the history of ASEAN. ASEAN is an association of Southeast Asian countries. It's like the EU, but it's only in Southeast Asia. Yeah, so I had to draw about the history, about the founding fathers, about all the country members of the associations. Something. It's very interesting because I had to do a lot of research, because I haven't traveled to all of the Southeast Asian countries. So I had to do a lot of research. I spoke with people from Southeast Asian countries. I had to watch videos, and it's not really 100% political comic, but it's mostly about history. Yeah, I also draw some short story, and this is one of them. It's still the main theme is about daily life. This is about dysfunctional family. And I really enjoy drawing these scenes, this particular scene, because I love to explore from different angles. And yeah, and then this is also one of my favorite project. Another project from client. This one is from National Museum of Indonesia. So they asked me to draw a story about one of their collection. One of their collection was a statue from the 13th century. So again, it's about history, and so it's more about education for children, and the comic is distributed at the museum. So people who visit the museum, they could read the backstory, the background story of each collection, but but not only by text, but in complete comics. I think visual really helps children and just everyone to understand the story, because visual is a universal language. So yeah, this was published also on Instagram. Yeah, this is about the story during the 13th century, because the Indonesian archipelago was about to be conquered by Kublai Khan from the Mongolian Empire. Yeah, it's history theme like this, which I really like. And I think the last one, I would like to spoil an upcoming project. I am collaborating with a writer. This particular writer, he is an American who has been living in Jakarta for 40 years, and he is sharing his perspective about Jakarta from his eyes during these 4 decades, and I am drawing the story. And yes, and this is just a sneak peek. It's not even finished, it's not even edited, but I just wanted to share this for tonight. And yeah, wish me luck for this new project, and I would say thank you.
Right, well, I'm Daryl Cunningham. I've been a cartoonist for far too many years, decades it seems, and I'm just going to go through a lot of history of what I've done, what I'm doing now. So I'm going to share the screen, if I can get this sorted. Let's see, right, this isn't my work. This is a guy called Franz Mazaril, who was a a Belgian, a Flemish woodcut artist. And the reason why I'm showing this first is sort of, it shows the sort of stuff that was really interested in me when I was much younger, in my 20s, when I went to Leeds College of Art. And I was very interested in this sort of very stark black and white way of drawing, and it sort of fed its way into my own work over the years, and I've very much continued with this sort of stuff. And I would also say that I grew up reading like the Beano and the Dandy and that kind of thing, so I have those kind of influences as well as inevitably sort of American comics and superheroes. But then always, when I was in my teens, I would say sort of early 20s, I sort of started seeing sort of British small press stuff like Eddie Campbell and Phil Elliott and people like that. And that made me realize that I could take any kind of subject, really. It didn't have to be sort of big science fiction ideas. I could take ordinary stuff, you know, day-to-day stuff, and turn those into strips. That was a big revelation to me. I'm working properly. It's an example of some early work of mine. So I worked for many years in psychiatric. I worked on in a secure psychiatric unit, first as a sort of untrained healthcare worker, and then later on I started to train as a mental health nurse. So this was a really tough job, as you can imagine. And after about 7 years, and it was sort of 3 years, it was a 3-year course, a mental health nursing course. And about 2 years into it, I realized I was completely burned out and didn't want to continue with it anymore, really, because I was suffering a lot of the symptoms that of so many of the people that I supposedly was nursing. In other words, I was sort of suffering from very high levels of anxiety and depression, and I thought, this isn't really for me anymore. I should really leave. Because when people came onto the ward suffering with those symptoms, and often you would find that it was work related, you just said that, well, really what you should do is change your job. So that's what I did, really. But then I was thinking, people kept coming up to me and saying things like, oh, how can you do this job? It's so difficult. And I realized that most people didn't really know much about psychiatric work, didn't really know much about psychiatric illnesses. So out of that experience, I started doing very personal stories of what my experiences were working in psychiatric, and specifically I wanted to talk about what particular illnesses was like. So this eventually led to this book, Psychiatric Tales, which sort of breaks down into chapters, each chapter looking at a particular psychiatric illness like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, that kind of thing. And so I just kept going with that, and I didn't have a publisher to begin with, so I just started, and sort of the internet was blowing up around this time as a way of like showing work, I would say like sort of mid 2000s coming up to the end of 2006, 2007, I started working on this, and I started sticking the chapters online. I didn't go to a publisher, I just stuck them online, and lo and behold, I got a massive response from people, because it turns out what I thought was just was very particular to me was much more universal, really. So eventually, like publishers came to me, not the other way around, because I was getting such an audience. So blank slate to publish this one, and and that led to Science Tales. So I'd, after Psychiatric Tales, I was sort of looking around for like other obvious subjects, and it seemed to me that I was very interested in science, and I thought, well, there are a lot of like subjects around that need properly explaining. So this book was sort of a deep dive into controversial science subjects, things like evolution, some alternative therapies like chiropractic, vaccination, that kind of thing, the anti-vax movement and all that kind of thing. So I wanted to take these subjects and really look at them and explain them properly to people, and really to destroy a lot of the myths, as I did with like Psychiatric Tales previously. And that was basically a big attempt to sort of destroy a lot of the myths of psychiatric illnesses, and take out a lot of the problems that people had seeing those. So, and that eventually led me on to Super Crash. Now this, when I finished Science Tales, I was sort of looking around for the next subject, and that was around 2008. So, and I was sort of looking around and thinking, what else can I do? So the banking crisis was happening there, and this was another sort of big subject that I didn't properly understand. And I find that over the years, that if I want to understand thing properly, and I'm really interested in it, the best way to do it is just write a book about it. So this is what I want to know, what that was, and I felt that the media wasn't properly explaining it. So I did a huge book, really, a big thick book, explaining what the banking crisis was, what the thinking behind it that led to it, really, the sort of laissez-faire economics that led to the banking crisis, why the economic thinking brought that about. So that was basically that was what that was about. That led me to Graphic Science, which is another science book. And this here, what I wanted to do was look at some scientists who were sort of off the sort of beaten track. People like Mary Anning, who was a famous fossil hunter. People like, I didn't want to do like a book about Newton and Einstein and all those kind of people. I wanted to take a book and look at people who had both interesting lives and also took on sort of interesting sort of science subjects. So this is the book I did that. I took 7 different people. And that eventually led me to Billionaires. Excuse me while I take a drink of water. So Billionaires, I was interested in sort of the richest people in the world, the 1%, really. So the way that I tackled this, I looked at 3 sets of people, really. Jeff Bezos, sort of, who obviously runs Amazon, the Koch brothers, who are sort of oil and gas billionaires in America, and Rupert Murdoch, obviously because of his media empire. So there are 3 different areas, really: technology and retail, oil and gas, and the media. So I looked at their lives, and these are sort of, this book's broken up into sort of 3 biographies of these people from their early beginnings, and it shows the development of their industries and how their industries have gone on to have quite a pernicious influence on our world, basically owning all our media, owning all the ways that we buy products, owning basically everything, often influencing politics, owning politicians often, and influence the whole structure of politics. So this is quite a big book, but then I've become by now very skilled at taking these very big subjects and then sort of boiling them down and explaining them in a clear and concise way. Now, when I was sort of doing the publicity for Billionaires, I sort of jokingly said that my next book will be about Vladimir Putin. And the reason, and I wasn't really planning to do that, but the more, I said it as a joke, really. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, that's a really good idea, because I had read that Vladimir Putin was unofficially among the richest people in the world. He might actually be the richest person in the world. It's impossible to say, but all we can say is really that he has masses of assets. Pretty much anything in Russia essentially is his, really. And obviously they've got massive oil and gas reserves, and they've exploited those resources. I mean, Putin's been in power for now for 20 years, so him and his little crime cartel have been ransacking the country and making themselves billions. So I really thought I really will do this. I'll go on and write a book about Putin. And so Putin's Russia is basically a book not just about Putin, but it's also about the development of Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union over the past 20 years or so. So it's a sort of a twin thing, really. So looking at Putin as he has risen to power from his early roots. Basically, I didn't know much about his background, nothing about his background, really. So I started looking into that, and it turns out that he grew up in what was Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, just after the Second World War. His father, his parents, survived the sort of Nazi siege of Leningrad, almost starving to death, and his father was injured, like fighting the Nazis. He was blown up in a grenade attack. You can see there. So these are all images from the book. So the book sort of shows what happened to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and all the statues came down, when we first saw like the beginnings of democracy and in Russia, what is now the Russian Federation. So this book also shows the development of that. So what I've tried to do really is to break down the book into sort of sections. We look at his childhood, how he became a politician, well, how first Putin joined the KGB and basically became a lawyer, and then that allowed him to join the KGB, and then he began his career first working in Germany, and then moving back to what was then St. Petersburg, and working in local government as sort of mayor's aide, where he was implicated in massive amounts of corruption at that time. Literally millions of dollars of stuff was like stolen out of the economy from there. And this is one of the problems with the Russian economy. There's a massive amounts of corruption almost at every level. One of the reasons why the Russian military has done so badly in the Ukraine is that you cannot, it doesn't matter how much money the Russian government give the military, about a third of that money will always be shaved off along the way, at every point along the way, spending along the way. Someone will take off money. So they often, you end up with a military that's quite depleted, really, and often with old machinery that hasn't been like properly worked on for years. We saw that with like the submarine Kirk disaster in the early 2000s. There's a bit more about that. This last image, by the way, is from Syria, and we've seen this is Russians bombing campaign in Syria, and we should have really realized from looking at what Russia did in Syria, how they were going to approach the war in Ukraine. So they're basically taking the same tactics, really. They don't discriminate between military targets and civilians. It's all the same to them. Schools, hospitals, they'll often create pathways for refugees to go and then deliberately target those refugees. We've seen it again in Ukraine recently, where they deliberately target. Just this last week, a railway station. So it comes out of the sort of brutal mafioso ethic that Putin and his crime cartel has, really, that they just see anyone below them as a resource to exploit. I mean, the Russians, they have a massive economy for the really, but you wouldn't know that if you were an ordinary Russian, because it's all that wealth has been spirited away and given to this teeny elite at the top. Putin himself has a massive palace on the Black Sea coast. Here's an image that sort of sums up sort of the corruption that's going on now. It basically effects of Russian people. And you have to understand that the Russian people are increasingly getting less and less information about what's really happening in the outside world. In many ways, it's going back to the way it was in the old Soviet Union, where they're increasingly isolated. So when you see polls, Russian polls of them supporting Putin, there are two reasons why you should be suspicious of that. One is that it's a totalitarian regime, and what else are people going to say? And also, they're not getting information, proper information they should be getting. So I also write in the book about often the assassination programs that the Putin regime had done, both internally and externally. Russians often report as a fair game. I write in this little section about a reporter called Anna Politkovskaya, who was first she was poisoned when she was on a plane, and she was a big critic of Putin. First she survived poisoning, and then about a year later she was gunned down in the lobby of her apartment. But there's loads of examples of that. I mean, we know that there's been poisons abroad. Even in this country, we've had there was a nerve gas attack in Salisbury, if you remember, which the attempt was to kill a double agent called Sergei Skripal. He survived, but unfortunately, a totally innocent woman called Dawn Sturgis died in that attack, and many people were sick as well. So I'm just getting to the end of this right now, I think.